All right, well, I guess we'll start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Baumann. I'm the president of the Birmingham Bluefield Chamber of Commerce. I've been the president for about 10 years. Came to the chamber from the private sector where my first and I thought forever career was going to be in the newspaper industry. I left the industry in 2009 when the industry kind of left me during the last terrible economic crisis we had in the state of Michigan. And in my role with the newspapers as managing editor, I was heavily involved in the community and serving on boards, and was actually on the board of directors of the Birmingham Bluefield Chamber representing my company before I crossed over the bridge to the staff. We serve 6 communities in suburban Detroit. Pre-COVID, we had about 700 member businesses in our chamber. We'll see what that looks like at the end of 2021, not really sure. So we have a very large physical footprint for a local chamber of commerce. As I said, we have 6 different municipalities that we cover and try to provide outstanding service to our member businesses. As I said, prior to that, I was in the newspaper business, so I understood boards serving on them as volunteers, which I think really helped me then gain an idea of how boards should operate as opposed to maybe how they do operate. And so we've been very strategic here in rebuilding the whole process of boards. Obviously, board of directors of volunteer associations and organizations are critical to the success of those organizations. And I would say that whatever you represent or wherever you work, your entity is probably only as good as its board of directors. The staff can only do so much. As I said, we have a staff of 4 that we're trying to service nearly 700 member businesses. So we rely heavily on our board members for expertise, for support, and for their knowledge. So we're going to talk a little bit about today about being strategic and how you create a board, and some tricks that you can use to make sure that you've got a great board of directors. I'm joined by Carlin Smith, who's going to moderate and lead us in a little discussion. So Carlin, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Hear you now.
All right. So I'm struggling a little challenges to figure out who is in the session, who is at the event. So I'm kind of muddling my way through this. So, and are you able to see chat now, Joe, or not?
I am, yes.
Okay.
So the last one I see is from Michael Swick, who says good morning.
All right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So the way that we're going to do this is Carlin and I are going to have a conversation. Carlin, before his current position with Consumers Energy, was the president and CEO of the Petoskey Area Chamber of Commerce. So obviously, he and I have a lot of similar backgrounds and experiences. And Carlin was an outstanding chamber executive, and we miss him dearly. But he's gone on to greener pastures and deeper pockets, so good for you.
And shameless plug, but I'll be presenting at I think it's 1:40 today on. I'll be speaking a lot on boards as well, but board diversity, mostly attracting young people, and also succession planning and that type of thing. So I'll kick it off, Joe, with a couple of questions, if that's all right. So tell me a little bit about your board selection process. What's your priorities at Birmingham Bluefield on how you select board members? How involved are you as an executive? And how involved are I assume you use a nominating committee. How does that all work?
Great. So if you've seen one chamber, you've seen one process for selecting board members. Some chambers, some associations do an open call from their membership. Some have a nominating committee. Some have requirements about previous service to the organization to be considered for the board. What we've done in Birmingham Bloomfield is we've kind of changed that whole process. And what we do is the executive committee of the chamber serves as our nominating committee. And I, as president, am a member of the executive committee. And so I'm very involved. My board relies on me to help identify potential directors for the board. We don't do an open call for directors. We don't solicit applications from members. What we do instead is our strategy for our board is we want to make sure that it is reflective of the industries that make up our chamber, that we have a good mix between large businesses and small businesses, that wherever we can do it, we stress for diversity and inclusion. And we want to make sure that the real key companies in our footprint are on our board, because the integrity and the quality of your board is certainly a reflection on your organization. So the first thing I would say for people who are looking to, make some changes on their boards, you have to look at your bylaws. Your bylaws for your organization should indicate how you're supposed to be appointing directors. And so if you want to make a change, you need to review those bylaws and make sure that you're making amendments to your bylaws before you don't follow their footprint. So what we do at the chamber, as I said, is one other diversification that we do, Carlin, is we use the 3T test, that being time, talent, and treasure. We want to make sure that our board members are able to have the capacity of giving at least one of the 3Ts to the organization. We believe that there is great value for a company to have a seat on our board of directors. And we want to make sure that there's a good ROI for both the chamber and the board. And so, again, like I said, the executive committee, they make suggestions as to who should be board members. I make recommendations based on my experience in the communities. And so what we do is we actually, we invite individuals to apply for a board seat. There's no, like I said, there's no open call for nominations. We actually go out and we ask people who we think would benefit from sitting on our board and what the chamber would benefit from having them sit on the board. We ask them if they would be interested in being a member of our board of directors. So we do that. We do have term limits at the chamber, and I hope all of you, your organizations have term limits, because you really need to have turnover on your boards. And so we make those invitations. After that, I schedule a meeting with myself and the applicant, and we kind of go over what the requirements are for serving on the board and answer any questions they have. The executive committee, is the nominating committee, will then approve them to be placed for consideration, and then the full board of directors will then act on the recommendation of the executive committee. Something really interesting that we've discovered, and it's quite remarkable, for many associations and many organizations, including mine when I first got here, there was almost a rule that if you weren't, a foot soldier already for the chamber, you would not be considered for a board seat. You had to have been on a committee. Oftentimes, for organizations that have ambassadors, that's where your board members come from. It's almost like a training ground. And you almost had to earn your stripes, as it were, to be considered for the board. We don't do that. So what we do is we look at individuals and say, okay, who has the capacity for leadership that will really benefit the organization by having us on our board? In the 10 years that I've been in the chamber, some of our very best board members had no previous experience with the chamber. Obviously, their member business, their organization was a member of the chamber, and they may have attended some of our events, but they weren't really invested in the chamber. What we found is if you pick the right people And if you pick the people who take leadership seriously because they're leaders in their own right, once appointed to the board, they will make sure that they do everything necessary to be a good member. And so I know that can be unsettling for some people to have, to appoint somebody with limited knowledge about your organization on your board. But I would certainly urge you to get over that hesitation and really look at leaders in your community who you think will add to the value of your board.
Joe, when you talk about those leaders, what kind of characteristics are you looking for? In other words, when you picture an ideal board member, what does that ideal board member bring to the table?
So first and foremost is we want to make sure that our board members are in a sufficient leadership capacity in their own organization that they're a decision maker, that they have the ability to decide things on behalf of their company, whether it's sponsorship, involvement, support, it doesn't matter what it is. We've actually had some organizations, and it can be a difficult conversation, where we've been approached by a member business and they've wanted to put somebody up for consideration for the board that was not in a true leadership C-suite capacity in the organization. And we've had to gently say, I'm sorry, but that doesn't meet the criteria for our board. We really need to have a senior exec. A lot of companies, frankly, and businesses, they like to place their business development people or their marketing people on local boards and organizations because it's fertile ground for them to try to find new business, right? And that's why they are involved in your organization. They're looking to make connections and network. But those aren't the people who we want to have on our board. We want to be able to say, okay, Baumann Hospital, we really need your help with this. And we want to make sure that the representative for Baumann Hospital on our board has the capacity to say, okay, let's do it, and not have to get approval from 3 different layers. So that's really, really important. You have to have decision makers on your board. The other thing that it does, frankly, as I said, is it really elevates the visibility and the, panache of your organization. If people are looking to do business with you, if people are looking to sponsor events with you, if people are looking, foundations are looking to maybe make a contribution to your organization, frankly, if people are looking to join your organization or, apply for a position, social media is a great thing and the internet's a great thing. People do go on your website and they do review who's on your board of directors. And boy, if you've got all stars on your board and you've got all the right businesses from your communities represented in the leadership position, it speaks volumes about the quality and integrity of your organization.
Your comments are spot on, Joe. Some advice I got from a mentor early in my chamber tenure was to go for the decision makers in your organization. And those few times over my career where we've had somebody who maybe was at a lower management level or end up being on the board didn't meet the standards of the other people sitting around the table. So I think your words are wise on that. Earlier, you also talked about kind of an ROI for the volunteers, for those people who serve on your board. What do you think they are looking for by having a board seat on your chamber board or maybe your organization board for whatever it might be? Oh, and just for the record, on a side note, before you answer that, I got some chats. Sean is on their call. He's from the Clarkston Area Chamber of Commerce. And then also Courtney is on the call, and she's with the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. And if anybody else on the call wants to chime in and tell me where they what organizations they represent, that would be maybe a little bit helpful to us. But my question was about ROI for volunteers and board members. What are they looking for, and how do you support them with that?
So again, my experience has been that people who are willing to serve on your board, they may be looking for personal growth and development. They want to be seen as a leader in their particular industry. That's one thing. They're also looking to elevate the visibility of their business, their company, their organization, whatever it might be, so that others in the community see their business as a leader and somebody that's wanting to give back to the community. And some do it because they just think that they have capacity to provide some expertise that is needed by the organization, and they want to do that. So as I said, my chamber, we have a staff of 4, we have 700 members. We don't have a legal department. We don't have an HR department. We don't have an IT department. We don't have an HR department. And so another thing that you should think about when you're trying to analyze your board and being strategic on who you have on there is you should be picking individuals, again, that have the capacity to make decisions on their organizations providing professional and technical in-kind support to the organization. So, one of my directors is a lawyer, and he provides all of our legal help as part of their company's contribution to the chamber. My board treasurer is the partner in a CPA firm, and they do all of our taxes and take care of all of that stuff for us, pro bono. When we needed to rewrite and update our employee handbook, I reached out to Baumann Hospital because they have a huge HR department and said, hey, can you help us do this? And they pretty much produced a new employee handbook for us. So those are the kinds of things that you do. And then you thank them, you thank them, you thank them. You position them in the chamber as industry experts. And I think that's the greatest return that they get, because they know, if we get a call and somebody's new to town and they're looking for a product or a service, we're first going to go and we're going to refer them to our board members for that business. So I think really that's what their ROI is that they get to position themselves as really experts in our communities.
Another thing I've seen from the ROI standpoint from board members is the valued relationships that they establish with other board members. One of the things that was very heartwarming for me or rewarding for me as a chamber executive when I would see friendships develop among board members from the camaraderie that they developed on the board. And that was always a great thing. And I think a lot of those relationships are formed by being part of the chamber board. So I always respected that too.
And while we don't want to be romantic matchmakers, I will say that we have had one instance where 2 of our directors actually met one another from being on the board and eventually got married. So
wow.
You never know what your ROI is going to be.
Did you officiate the wedding, Joe?
I did not, no. And I'm happy to report that they're still married 7 years later. So
that's wonderful. That's a great story. That's fantastic. So this is probably not where you were going with with your conversation today, but you mentioned the role of the treasurer and also like legal, providing some pro bono kind of work and stuff. I remember I had an attorney on our board named Steve. He was an awesome guy, and he would tell me, I'll let you know when I have to start the meter, so he would tell me what was free, and then, oh, you're kind of crossing into a line where we might need to start the meter. So I always appreciated that honest dialogue from him. But for me, treasurer was my MVP of my board of directors. I was not really sound in counting, and that's finance is not my strongest suit. So I really worked hard around the treasurer. I found personally, on a side note, that CFOs made great treasurers. Accountants were good, bankers were good, but the CFOs not only could count the beans, but they could help you make more beads. You know, they knew how to go out and make money and raise money. So just put that away. CFOs make great treasurers. But tell me about your relationship with your treasurer, how you work with them, because for me, that was a real valuable member of our board. And then Sean has a question. I'll pipe in with that when you're
Okay.
done with
So as I said, our treasurer, he's a partner of a local firm in Birmingham. He's a great one to ask questions. I think that's really how he sees his role, is to ask questions as to why we're doing something the way that we're doing it as it relates to our budget or finances, or why aren't we doing something? He and I talk regularly. As I said, he does our 990 for us. He files our taxes. He does all of that. So obviously he has to be up to date on what happens. He, as a volunteer, he has full access to our online banking system. So anytime he wants to, he can just go in and look at the ledgers or look at our accounts. And then the other place where he really helps us, Carlin, is in terms of forecasting. If you're running a nonprofit or a not-for-profit, it's a pretty tight budget normally, right? And then God knows with the pandemic what's going to happen. But if you want to get from A to B, you have to build the financial bridge to get there first. Because if something isn't funded and if something's not in the budget, it's not going to happen, right? That's just how it is. And so I'll say, hey, I would really like to be able to do this next year. And he'll ask me why. He'll ask me if I've done, the financial analysis. And then he'll say, okay, well, how do you plan to get there? And then it really kind of challenges me to think that I'm like you. I had no background in finance prior to running a chamber. And while I think I've become adept at budgeting, it's really being able to use him as a sounding board to do that. Now we're going to have a bit of a wiggle, I guess, starting in January, because my treasurer is also going to be taking on the role as board chair. So I'm not really sure how that's gonna work, but he's always really been good at making the resources of his firm available to us as well. Again, this company, when they first joined the chamber, I think they opened in Birmingham about 10 years ago. They were a pretty small firm, and they have grown organically to where now they're up to about 55 CPAs working in the office. And again, they were members of the chamber. They did some minor sponsoring of the chamber. But as we watched them grow, and as we saw that they were becoming a more influential member of the community, we reached out and said, hey, we would love to have your firm represented on our board. And that's how we began that relationship. And now obviously it's gone to the point where one of their partners is going to be our board chair. So, but really using their communication and helping, with the forecasting, I think is the most important.
I mean, if you don't mind me sharing a story, I hate to cut into your time too much, but I'm glad you mentioned the important role that board members can play to help you bridge. All right, we want to get to this. And I guess the advice I have is to actually listen to your board, because they know and they do this in their businesses. So help them guide you in your organization. I tell the story often, and you've probably heard it, Joe, so I apologize. But I had a board member who had joined our board and it just kind of sat quietly observing for a little while. And so I think he joined, maybe must have been in January. In April, we were at our ex over a cocktail table at the end of the event. And he told me what he's been observing about the chamber and said, Carlin, you and your staff are right on the button on your expenses. You know where every dime is going and how to manage your expenses. And he said, you do a great job with that. But then he followed that up with, but you don't have a clue about revenue. and it just like hit me. It was like a punch in the face. And I was actually offended at the moment, like, whoa, wait a minute. I've been doing this a long time. And then, but as I pondered it and he kind of explained his thoughts, he was right. We didn't know, we weren't purposeful about how we did revenue. And so under his leadership as a board member, we created some revenue strategies and we grew the chamber easily revenue-wise $20K a year under his leadership with the chamber, just by at first what he called stroke of the pen changes, and then it was more strategic changes, and through all of that, our chamber was much more sound financially, and that was the leadership of one board member that changed that. So it was critical. So my advice: listen to your board; they know what they're talking about.
So yeah, I'm guessing that everybody on this call representing your organization is. Budgeting is tight and it can sometimes be difficult. What we do here, frankly, we all know how to track dollars and allocate dollars. Our budget process typically is first we do the expense side of the budget. We figure out, okay, we need this, and this, all the GLs, right? And then you come up with a number. And then you're like, okay, now we have to figure out how we're going to raise sufficient revenue to cover the expenses. and many of us, again, I'm sure on this call, you rely on events, you rely on sponsorship, you rely on membership. Well, those are all fluid things. You can't 100%, predict what your revenue is going to be. So, that's another place where, your board members and your treasurer can come in, because they have different experiences that you do, and they can really analyze as to whether your predictions are, rosy or conservative. We always budget very conservatively. We budget for the possibility of not having as much revenue as we thought we were going to. And then if we do meet our revenue targets or exceed them, then happy days at the chamber, right? But at least that whatever you are planning to spend, you can cover that. So again, in this world of COVID, everything's kind of been thrown out the window because we've all lost our ability to fundraise and hold events. So, but I will tell you that working with, my treasurer has now been there for 5 years and being very conservative in our budgeting, we were able to build a pretty nice nest egg that has really helped us through this pandemic. I'm proud to say that we did not, and we did not have to lay anybody off. We didn't reduce hours because we knew our members were going to need our expertise and our support more than ever. And so by budgeting conservatively and working with your treasurer, it allowed us to have that fund balance that has helped us through these dark days.
Through that leadership mentioned, we solid nest egg at Petoskey Chamber too, and I'm sure that's helped them get through these times. Sean did have a question going back to, we were talking, I think, a little bit about treasurers and all of that. Your officer team. So his question is, any advice on selecting executive committee members? So we probably should talk about officers. My board secretary will be moving to the president-elect role, but I'm having a bit of difficulty finding someone willing to commit to take over the secretary role. So how do we lure people up into those officer positions that probably require another meeting a month and, a little.
Sure. So what we do here is the executive committee is charged with identifying and inviting directors to elevate to the executive committee. That's something that they do themselves. I don't really have a tremendous role in that. They'll obviously ask me questions and say, has this person been a good board member? What's their visibility? So on and so forth. But the key, I would say, is to don't make it too difficult for them to be officers. I mean, we have to be really cognizant of their time and their availability. And again, if you're putting the right people on your board, these are very busy, connected individuals that probably are supporting other organizations in addition to their own business in the chamber in their lives, because that's the kind of people that they are. I don't know, Sean, what your secretary's role is. I will tell you that at my organization, we actually got rid of all the officer titles except treasurer and chair. So we don't really have a secretary anymore, because even when we did, there was a staff person that always took all the minutes at the meetings, did all the documentation. The title of secretary was really more ceremonious than anything else. Obviously, you have to have a chair because the chair runs the board, and treasurer, because of the unique requirements of that position, obviously have that. So, my board of directors meets 7 times a year. My executive committee meets every month, and the executive committee of any organization should really be the ones doing the heavy lifting, guiding and supporting the staff and the executive, really doing more in-depth work on the budget, whereas your full board should be really more towards advocacy and policy geared. So I would say don't make it too difficult on them. Explain to them what their roles and responsibilities are going to be, and then try to support them as much as you can so it doesn't become overly burdensome.
Thanks, Joe. Question, Sean. He says, we're very similar in those roles, at least since I've been here since March of 2019. That sounds like a very smart way to do it. Thank you. So it kind of, Joe, and I think your message is about board development, and that is actual board training, board orientation. I know some chambers go as far as having written position descriptions for their board members, or written contracts and code of conduct kind of things and all of that. It's, as you said, if you see one chamber, you've seen one chamber. They're all different. So what are your priorities in terms of board training and board accountability?
So I think, again, it's critically important that you are as direct and complete as you possibly can in setting the roles and responsibilities and the expectations of a board member. The last thing you want is for somebody to join your board thinking it was going to be one experience, and it turns out to be a completely different experience, because they're not going to be happy and they're not going to be productive. So what we do here in terms of board training is so our cycle is the board is usually, the new members are approved at the November board meeting, and then they come on January 1. So in the period between the November board meeting and January 1, we schedule one-on-one meetings with each new board member, myself and the board chair, because I think it's really important to have a peer, so the board chair in that meeting, because they can talk about what it's like, as a volunteer, as opposed to me, what it's like, what the staff expectation is. In addition to that, we actually have a packet, to your point, Carlin, of what the roles and responsibilities are. There is a code of conduct as part of that packet. And then there's the 3T commitment form that I mentioned earlier about time, talent, and treasure. And so we give that all to them to review prior to this one-on-one meeting. And then the meeting really then becomes more of answering questions as sort of, again, if you've got the right people on your board, you don't really need to train them, because they're already probably familiar with how boards operate. But it's really just setting those realistic expectations and making sure that they fully understand what it is that they're agreeing to do. And then kind of a piggyback to that in terms of, how do you keep your board on track? So again, what we do is every January, so we're a morning meeting board, but in January, we always kick it off with a luncheon, mostly to get the board members to reconnect in a more social atmosphere and to meet the new board members in a more casual setting. After that meeting, what we do is we ask all of our board members to put in writing how they intend to support the chamber as a director in the new year. And so we have, it's called a 3T form. And so it'll say time, and then there will be bullets, talent, and there will be bullets, treasure, and there will be bullets. And they have to declare in writing how they're going to support the chamber in the year. And so what happens with those is halfway through the year, I sit down with the board chair and we review them. And we go, okay, who's fulfilling their commitment? Who's exceeding their commitment? Who's falling short of their commitment? And then if we have someone who's significantly falling short of their commitment, they get a call from the board chair just to check in. What's going on? Is there something happening in your work or your life that's preventing you from doing, what you said you were going to do? And so it's a supportive call, but kind of a prodding call as well. There needs to be a clear line between the board and staff. I would suggest that, and what we do here is, I say I have 20 bosses because technically every member of our board of directors is a boss, but really I report to the board chair. He or she is the one who has the greatest influence on me. But what I will never do, and I tell the board chair this when they come on board, is I will never place myself or a staff member in a position where I'm telling one of my bosses they're not doing their job. And so that is absolutely 100% the role of the board chair. My board chair runs the board meetings with my support, obviously, but everybody understands that the board chair is responsible for corralling the board and making sure that we're working together and heading in the same direction.
Are you comfortable sharing any nightmare board member stories? Have you had any?
So
nightmare might be a strong word, but those difficult board members and how you've handled those situations.
I've been so fortunate that we've had great boards and great chairs. I will say, though, we did have one time that the chair was a little more hands-on than probably was appropriate. Was always asking, like, they had the habit of just dropping in at the office, unannounced, which is fine. But they would say, oh, where's and how come? And so it was almost like I referred to it as kind of like a bed check. And that can become uncomfortable, frankly. Your leadership has to have confidence in the executive and the staff that the executive and the staff are going to do, the right thing, what's to do. And it can cause, it caused some uncomfortable times where, one of my team would say, hey, X dropped in and wanted to know where you were and why you weren't in the office. And that puts your team in a very difficult position, right? It's very uncomfortable. So I did have to, I just, bucked up and had a conversation and said, look, you can ask any question you want. You can come in whenever you want, but I would really appreciate it if you have a question of where I'm at or what I'm doing on any given day, you ask me and not one of my staff. And it certainly reduced the thing. And the person was apologetic. They said they didn't realize that that's how it was coming off. They're just curious by nature. So, boy, I'll tell you, in my role as the incoming chair of the Michigan Association of Chamber Professionals, I talk to chamber executives from all over the state on a very regular basis. And some of the stories that I hear about relationships between staff and boards are, quite chilling, actually. Nothing will poison an organization quicker than if you don't have trust between your board and your staff.
Yeah. So I'd be curious if any of our audience had any difficult board situations they were working through right now. This would be a great time. Or I can chime in as well if you're working on anything, get a little counseling, or maybe we can arrange to swap emails or something and talk on the side if you'd like. But feel free to speak up if you do. One of my mentors and good friends told a story about a year that a man was chair of his board, and he would just like to come in almost every day and just kind of hang out in the lobby of the chamber. And it wasn't so much that the director of the chamber was concerned about being micromanaged or whatever, but it was more like he had to entertain him. It took time to talk to him and to be whatever. And he said, I just didn't have that much time to spend with him, and he was needy and needed someone to talk to him every day. And so he felt like as board chair, he could be in the lobby every day. So it was an awkward situation, as you can imagine. I'm like you, Joe. I was blessed in my career. I didn't have that many board members, but I did have some what I would consider micromanagers and some push back on some things that were awkward and uncomfortable for me and the staff. I think a point that's worth emphasizing, and maybe you touched on it, and I apologize if you didn't, but you kind of alluded to it. The does not manage the staff. The board manages us as directors, presidents, as CEOs of the organization. It's our job to manage the staff. And when that boundary's crossed, that's kind of a deal breaker, and that's where we really need to step in. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So again, as I do some thoughts about, with sessions like this for various organizations, that's such an important part. There has to be a clear, direct line of command. And if you have board members who don't understand what their role is as a board member, you need to educate them. You can do it through a strategic plan. You can have somebody come in and do a session on what makes a great director. I know some people who actually have board members sit in on their job interviews for prospective staff. I would 100% discourage that if I can, because it just sets a very bad tone. The staff reports to the executive reports to the board. The staff does not report to the board. The executive, reports to the board chair primarily, and there needs to be that understanding. Now, that's not to say that, we have a very open policy here. I mean, if any board member wants to pick up the phone and call any of my staff members and ask them a question or make a suggestion, that's outstanding. But they all know that if they have an issue with how we're doing something or with one of the staff, they really need to go to the board chair and the executive committee, and then the executive committee comes to me. It gets so messy when you've got too many people trying to make organizational decisions or trying to run the chamber on a day-to-day basis.
So well said, Joe. Perfect. That was great. So Courtney, by the way, just commented that over the past few years, my biggest board concern is a lack of commitment and participation. And Joe, you had some great suggestions, so thank you for that. And Courtney, I would also add to something I'm going to talk about in my presentation this afternoon is about communicate. You really can't communicate with your board and too much, and that helps with that engagement and that participation. Also, Sean, a question. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say that I did put my email address in the chat. So if anybody has a follow-up question, they want to talk to me one-on-one, it's fine. If anybody wants to see what our board packet, looks like, our roles and responsibilities in our 3T form, I'd be happy to share it as well. No secrets. I learned early on as a chamber executive that the best idea was one stolen from another excellent chamber. So I'm more than happy to share our little nuggets that have worked, we think, pretty successfully.
Yeah, we call it in the industry R&D instead of research and development. It's rip off and duplicate.
Yes.
So I've also heard it called casing, copy and steal everything. And so I did my share of casing in my career.
So
Sean's question
about thoughts on
you got it?
members joining the board after they join, of course. He needs to fill one seat, and some board members have mentioned that they're reaching out to people who are not currently members. Yeah, well, obviously they have to join the organization before they can sit on the board. So would I put a brand new business, have a leader on the board? I think it depends. I think it depends on what the individual has to offer to the organization, why they would be interested in being on the board if they haven't even been in the chamber and supporting your organization. I think that would be a pretty in-depth conversation before I would recommend doing something like that. Now, however, if it happens to be, you know, a business or a company or an organization that is really critical in your community and they're a leader in the community, and for whatever reason they just haven't been engaged in the chamber, it goes back to, you know, elevating the vision and the visibility of the chamber by having those kinds of people on the board. So Sean, I don't know what your process is for getting applicants for your board, but if it is regular practice for board members to just suggest people, I guess what I would do is I would reach back to them and say, okay, tell me why you think this person would make a good director, and put it back on them to basically make the case for that person.
Good answer, Joe. Then there's also the opposite of that. And I remember a few times in my career, not often, but it happened more than once, where somebody was on my board and then they changed jobs while being a board member, and they happened to change to an organization that wasn't a chamber member. And so in a few of those cases, we rectify it by the new business joining the chamber, and we just kept that person on the board. But time the new business wouldn't join the chamber, and this board member eventually, we kind of gave him a window of opportunity and kind of let him stay on for a little while, but eventually we had to let him go. Have you encountered that?
I have, and I think we're going to see that again with everything shaking out with COVID. I mean, we've lost 3 board members who lost their jobs, frankly, and these were people who were senior level executives. Because curiously, when COVID happened and everything got shut down, and when budget decisions were made and cuts were made, it's been, what we've noticed is it's been more at the top management level than it has been at the lower levels of employees. So that's been, you know, that's been difficult for us. You know, we had, you know, 2 board members who represented large healthcare systems that were both on our board, and they both had their positions eliminated. So we're rebuilding those relationships right now because we want, you know, these large health systems represented on our board. They bring tremendous value and support, you know, in terms of even the critical mass of how many employees they have that can support your events, right? And attend and get the benefits from that. So it is, I think it's something that a lot of us and all of our organizations are going to be facing, that either you've lost board members because of that, or to your point, Carlin, they've changed jobs. Our rule is when that happens to somebody, we usually offer them the opportunity to keep their position if their new employer is a member of the chamber. As you said, if they're not a member of the chamber and they can't get the new organization to join the chamber, then we just have to say, thank you so much for your service and all the best in your new endeavor. And we say goodbye.
responding to Sean. He's stepping out. And I was hoping Sean would be here to hear this, but I don't want to steal any thunder from Michigan Festival Events Association, and certainly appreciate them inviting us and being a part of their convention. But you also mentioned Michigan Association of Chamber Professionals, and I don't know if Charlotte and Clarkston are part of MACP or not, but you're going to be board chair of that organization in 2021. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, just a quick minute commercial on MACP to let them know the values and resources for those who are on the call who work at Chambers of Commerce.
So the MACP is, again, it's a collection of all the executives of chambers from throughout the state of Michigan. I found the MACP to be invaluable when I first took my job. I served on the chamber board as a volunteer, but boy, there's a big difference between being an occasional volunteer and being in the trenches on a daily basis. And frankly, I don't think I would have had the success that I've had without the support I got from MACP, where you can talk to people who are, veterans and seasoned in the industry for advice and support and resources and really just a sounding board. I mean, Carlin, you were one of my mentors, and I am forever grateful for you that you took an interest in me as a new executive, and you took the time to get to know me and to help me along the way. So I would say if you're new in your role as a chamber executive, or even if you're not, it's such a wonderful, tremendous resource. You will build relationships all over the state, but more importantly, you'll get some really great friendships out of being involved. And as I said, I relied on MACP a lot for help my early years as a chamber executive, and now that I've completed my 10th year as a chamber executive, it's give back time, right? So was on the board, and now I will be chair, and I really see my role is explaining the benefits of the organization and encouraging new chamber execs to get involved. Especially if you're coming from the private sector into the not-for-profit world, it can be a really large obstacle. And so make sure that you build those networks and rely on your fellow executives and get involved. We've been having a meeting, a weekly call for MACP every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. It's open to both MACP members and non-members, because we know, all of us who are running, not-for-profits right now are struggling in our roles because of COVID. And it's a great way to get something off your chest or ask a question or get some advice for something that you're struggling with. I'm happy to invite anybody on this call to join one of our Tuesday morning chats and just see what it's all about. So thank you for allowing me the commercial, Carlin, and Michigan Festival and Events.
So I don't know when you wrap up.
I think we're done at 11:30. So.
Oh, okay. So
Carlin,
I guess
so
I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder today, and you were able to wrap up and get your points out.
Not at all. It's been wonderful sharing an hour with you. I miss you, buddy.
Well, I miss you too. So.
And everybody on the call, like I said, shoot me an email, give me a call. Chamber execs are always easy to find. So, and I'd be happy to help in any way I can. So thanks to Michigan Festival Events for having me participate, and enjoy the rest of your convention.
Thanks.
See you later.
And by the way, our thing was a two-way street, everybody. It's so Joe and I have had many great conversations over the years.
Take care.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.